Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and this is My Life as a Landlord. And I'm so pleased you've joined me for today's show. Today, we are exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for the state of West Virginia, where my family's from. In all of my location-specific episodes, I've included a bunch of hyperlinks to the local tenancy laws, as many as I thought was helpful. I don't want to go too crazy. I don't want to get confusing, but all of this is an effort to get you started in tenancy in West Virginia. And each of my location-specific episodes is set up the exact same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of the tenancy law in that location, in this case, West Virginia? What are the nuances in that location? What are some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in West Virginia, and where to get help in your local area in West Virginia? And then at the very end of the episode, I'll go through what I call my bingo card, which is my list of the most standard items I see when I do these location-specific episodes, and I'll review what's there, what's missing, and maybe even what's extra. But I must tell you, this episode is not all-inclusive. 5 minutes after I record this thing, there could be changes, and very often there are. And so, pardon me. So you've got to make sure that you do your own research, your own education, and especially if you are nearby a city center, that you can pop into a housing office and you can learn a little bit more about the West Virginia tenancy laws and answer any questions you might have. Or there's plenty of online resources as well. I'm going to go through all of my hyperlinks here in this episode. I am going to screen share, so hopefully you're watching this on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord. So again, this is not all inclusive. This episode will get you started, but you must do your own homework. I'm going to give a shout out for today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments LLC. If you want to know more about real estate investing or what Michael and I are up to, check out alohajv.com. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and screen share and get into our resources here. Okay, so this is the first one. So remember, tenancy law is still a law, right? And so this is the actual West Virginia code. This is chapter 37, real property. And so you can go through a bunch of these. You can go landlord and tenant, article 6, here it is. This is the whole thing. Parties, reversion, remainder, notice to enter, distress, fees of the clerk. Okay, so display all Article 6 sections. So we can go through all of this. In fact, we might do that with the bingo card if we don't see it. I just want to make sure. May recover the rent. Oh, they have good. Persons liable for rent, termination of lease upon death. This is important because I think as we're seeing our population age, there's going to be more tenants passing away in units, and we're going to have a lot more folks who are experiencing this as landlords dealing with tenants who are either transitioning to care homes or becoming to the point where they cannot care for themselves or dying in the units. So if you haven't heard my episode 60 about what to do when a tenant dies in your unit, please check that out. But this is really good that this is in the West Virginia civil law here. And okay, I'm going to go through the rest of this. We'll come back to this here if unless there's some better summaries, and I think there are. But this is chapter 37, article 6 for landlord and tenant. And there is a couple of addendums here. Security deposits. In fact, yeah, let's do this. Application fee. Yep, we talk about that. Actually, application fee is on my bingo card. Notice period. 60 days of termination of tenancy or within 30 days of occupation. Yeah, okay. Rumor, security deposit. Security deposit does not include prepaid rent. Security deposits. Let's see. Let's just hit this one because this is always a big one. Security deposit, of course, is the tenant's money that you're holding during the entire time of their tenancy. Upon termination of the tenancy and within applicable notice periods. Okay, security deposit. If you're going to keep any of their security deposit at all, you have to provide a written itemized list, and it can be applied to back rent, including reasonable charges for rent late fees, which have to be specified in the rental agreement. So that's a nuance you need to pick up on. You need to make sure you put what your late fees are. Payment of the amount of damages which the landlord has suffered reason of the tenants of non-compliance. Okay, less reasonable wear and tear. Okay, payment of unpaid utility bills can also be paid out of the security deposit. Payment of reasonable costs for removal and storage of the tenant's personal property, especially if it has been, looks like if it's been abandoned, which we'll talk about. Other damages and charges is provided in the rental agreement. Doesn't say how much it is though. Maintenance records. I'm just reading through about security deposits. I'm just trying to find out how much it is. It just says what it can be applied to. I'll include the rent, pet fee, or application fee. So it does talk about a pet fee. So security deposit does not include rent, pet fee, application fee. Parties expressly agree in writing that a pet fee or application fee is non-refundable. A security deposit does not include prepaid rent because security deposit is a liability. It is the tenant's money that is held. It is not rent. Rent is actually paid for. It's a money for a service. So of course the security deposit does not include rent because it's not the same thing. They're both money, but they're not the same thing. Okay. Maintenance records, prohibited provision, landlord's non-compliance. I'm sure we'll get into some of this. Okay, let's keep going. This is more of Article 6A. And I'm going to go back to Article 6, but we're going to talk more about this in a second. So I've got 5 hyperlinks in the description here. The next one is Home and Apartment Archives from Legal Aid West Virginia. Their website is actually really easy, legalaidwv.org or lawv.org. And they have a bunch of frequently asked questions on eviction process, checklist moving into a new rental. Let's look at their checklist and see what that looks like. Give me a short checklist. Read the lease and understand your responsibilities. Consider renter's insurance. I don't normally see renter's insurance, but it's on the bingo card, so that's good. Change your address. Okay. Moving into rental housing. And then they've made a video. I'm actually very impressed, West Virginia, because it looks like Legal Aid has made a ton of YouTube videos. It pops right up in YouTube. There's tons of videos about West Virginia tenancy stuff. So that's another option for you. If you're looking for places to go, throw it into YouTube and see what comes up because there's a bunch. Let's see. What's the short checklist? Oh, here we go. Checklist for moving into a new rental housing. Oh, this is good. Wow, this is fantastic. Read the lease. It's actually a checklist. Like, no kidding, it's a checklist. That's fantastic. That's the whole thing. Legal Aid of West Virginia, again, legalaidwv.org if you are got questions. That is fantastic. Well done. Okay. So this is I just did legalaidwv.org and then home and apartment is what I clicked. And then they said they've got filtered by topic. So they've got all these bubbles up here. Contracts, debt and lending, money issues, discrimination around housing, mobile homes, recovering after disaster, renting or leasing a home, which is what I've clicked. And then they say, what type of filter do you want? Do you want audio, frequently asked questions, a form? Actually, I'll click forms as well, toolkit or video. And so I've got just oh, there's probably 50 things in here that you could actually do this. How to get your security deposit back. Let's go into that one. That's always coming up. How do I get my security deposit refund from my landlord? What is my security deposit and is it covered by law? Okay. So how do I get my security deposit refund? West Virginia law spells out what steps you need to take, what deductions the landlord can subtract from the deposit, and what time limits apply. Let's click on that because I'm still trying, and it goes right back to security deposits. Okay, let's go back to security deposits again. This is exactly where we just were in chapter 37, 6A2, security deposits. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit further. And it still doesn't say how much it is. It says definitions. Let's look at the definitions. Okay, in the comments, if you are a landlord in West Virginia or you are a lawyer that does West Virginia real estate work, please, how much is your security deposit? I'm hoping it's in your standard lease, but it might not be. Doesn't say. Interesting. A little bit confusing. That's okay. I may be reading it wrong as well. That's okay. What can the landlord take out of my security deposit? Is there reason? What is reasonable wear and tear? Let's see what theirs is. Okay. So there's difference between normal wear and tear and willful damage. Normal wear and tear is just simple things that happens like worn carpet, chipped paint, worn finish on a wood floor, faded or dingy paint. Um, and this happens over the course of wear, normal wear. But when you've got willful damage, this is beyond normal wear and tear. Examples include kids' crayon art on the walls, broken windows, holes or nails in the walls, punches in the doors, leaving trash or other items to have to be thrown away. Yeah. If the landlord is taking my money, okay. Summary of the steps. Checklist for moving out of a rental unit. Oh, I like all these little checklists. This is cool. Okay, give the landlord advance notice of one full rental period. This is for month to month. Repair minor damage, clean the unit, remove all trash and food. Ask the landlord to do a walkthrough, a condition inspection at the move out. Return the keys. Tell the landlord when you've actually gotten everything out. Leave a forwarding address and take pictures. Ooh, here's a good one. Abandoned personal property in the rental housing. Let's go right into that now. I know I'm bopping around, but that's okay. How is the landlord supposed to be getting written notice? I've moved out of my rental property and left personal property behind. Can the landlord throw my property away? After you move out and the landlord regains possession of the rental, West Virginia law requires the landlord must try to give you written notice that they plan to dispose of your property, meaning either donate it, dispose of it, or sell it, and give you a deadline to connect your belongings. The landlord is not required to protect trash. So that's interesting. When you move out, remove all your personal property and return the rental unit to its original condition so you can get back your security deposit. Learn more about security deposits. Read this article. We're reading it. That's the same one we were just there. Okay, I still don't see how much it is. Okay, let's move on. Let's keep going. So it's going back and forth and back and forth. So I'm bebopping between Chapter 37 in West Virginia Code, and I'm also going between Legal Aid Society of West Virginia, which is legalaidwv.org, which is pretty good. I think um, there's lots of information and lots of different resources. I've never seen an option where you can filter it between audio, video, frequently asked questions, and forums. I thought that was pretty interesting. So what is a security deposit? How much should I expect to pay? Here we go. Security deposit is a refundable amount paid by the tenant, usually cover any damage to the rental beyond normal wear and tear. It's usually equivalent to 1 month's rent. It's the first time we've seen that. When you read your lease, make sure the conditions for refunding the deposit are clearly stated. The West Virginia law spells out the steps you need to take, how to get it back. Okay, let's keep going. So West Virginia, one of the next brochures that you're going to see in the hyperlink, the renter's rights brochure PDF. It's just 2 pages. And so if you're watching this at YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, you're going to see just a very simple renter's rights. This is a trifold. And so it's really simple. And it's from the Office of the West Virginia Attorney General. It's talking about landlord tenant law in West Virginia, and it's got the Attorney General's office, legal aid in West Virginia, state bar attorney hotline for West Virginia, and then the HUD complaint line for bad landlords, especially in federal housing. That may not apply here, but still there's a line. And talks about eviction from rental property, enforcement of the laws, standard requirements. Here's more about security deposits, tenant privacy. This is talking about abusive access, which we've talked about on the show as well. State law prohibits landlords from entering rental housing without either the consent of the tenant or providing reasonable notice in advance, unless circumstances require the landlord to perform emergency repairs. Emergency is if you have to call 911. It's not an emergency if it's an emergency to you personally. Do's and don'ts of landlord-tenant law. Okay, this one I'm going to read because these are actually really interesting. Landlords and tenants should make sure that their rights and responsibilities are clearly spelled out in a written rental agreement. Yes, I agree. Don't do a handshake. That's bad. Tenants should notify the landlord in writing of any damages and or needed repairs prior to taking possession of the rental housing unit. This can also be documented on a condition inspection sheet at move-in. It is unlawful for a landlord to lock out a tenant, shut off utilities, refuse repairs, or take other steps to effectively evict a tenant without going through the court. A landlord may not seize or impound a tenant's property as a way of collecting rent owed. A landlord may not evict a tenant in retaliation for complaints of unfit housing conditions. Tenants should report any unfit housing conditions to the landlord or to local government agencies such as the building code inspector, fire marshal, or health department. Landlords should promptly return the balance of any damage or security deposits made to the tenant. Upon moving out, tenants should take photographs and or video of rental property to document the condition of the unit. And it is unlawful for the landlord to refuse to rent or to evict a tenant because of race, color, religion, ancestry, sex, familiar status, blindness, handicap, national origin. And I'm sure there's a number of other protected classes that could fall in that and is not on this brochure. So this is just a helpful information. This one, let's see, what's the next one? I try to use as much as we can straight from the governmental agencies, whether it's from Office of Consumer Protection or the State Attorney General, Legal Aid Society. I try not to go to for-profits too much because it seems like it's a editorial where they're trying to get you to buy something, but I also use it for informational purposes. So in this case, I did pull up iPropertyManagement.com for West Virginia, only because I like how they concisely put this together. So, but you might check this again. This is only to get you started. Don't rely only on this. It's got tenant responsibilities in West Virginia, evictions in West Virginia, and if you've got, so your rental term ends abruptly. If you've got a fixed lease, so let's say it's a year lease and you've got your lease end is approaching, it does end abruptly. You could have a holdover situation, but that means that you've got a no lease or end of lease eviction. Basically, you're ending tenancy on them, but you got to give proper notice. And you cannot, there's another notification about evicting tenants for retaliatory purposes. You cannot do that. Here it talks about it again. It's illegal for landlords to retaliate against tenants who assert their rights under rental agreement by taking a protected action, like reporting a landlord to a government authority for health and safety violations. Security deposits. Inventory requirement, not required. Okay, so inventory requirement is not required to document the condition of the rental at the start of the lease term in order to collect the security deposits. There's no interest requirement, so you don't have to pay interest throughout the hold. And it says there's no maximum. Collections of the following laws apply to collection and holding security, maximum none. And so what we saw before was typically 1 month, but it looks like you could hold more if that's applicable. But I would check with legal aid on that one. It looks like you could, but I don't know. I trust but verify. Returns and deductions from the security deposit. You can allow deductions, unpaid rent, utilities, late fees, physical damage, excluding normal wear and tear, cost due to tenants' non-compliance with the lease, costs of removal and storage of property, especially after abandonment, or other charges outlined in the lease agreement. For example, if you break the lease and they've agreed that they would pay an early termination fee, that would be in there as well. Time limit for return a security deposit, either 45 or 60 days, which is insanely long. 45 days after the next tenant moves in, or 60 days after the lease term ends, whichever occurs first. Man, that's really long. Holy moly. Max penalty for late return. Tenants can sue for 1.5 the times of the deposit of the amount wrongfully withheld plus court costs. That's actually not a lot. I've seen either double or triple. Lease termination in West Virginia, you've got to give proper notice. If you've got a year-to-year notice, a year-to-year lease, you've got to give 3 months notice. Early termination in West Virginia is allowed for the following reasons. If there's an early termination clause in the lease, if they're active duty military, which is sort of standard, unhabitable unit, or landlord harassment. Tenants who break the lease in Virginia may still be required to pay the entire remainder of the rent owed on the term. So there is an acceleration clause, meaning they are still on the hook for that. Cost of breaking the lease. If the West Virginia tenant breaks their lease early, they are still liable for the rent. So there is an acceleration clause. We said that. Landlords are legally required to make a reasonable effort to re-rent the unit. If they find a new tenant, then the original tenant is no longer liable to pay the rent. But landlords cannot keep the full security deposit because a tenant broke their lease. Oh, this is interesting. The landlord cannot keep the full security deposit because a tenant broke their lease. The landlord can make deductions for the damages or unpaid rent, but the rest must be returned. So they cannot use the deposits for early termination. Rent increases. West Virginia does not have rent control. State law does not prohibit cities and towns from creating their own rent control, and none have adopted local laws restricting rent increases. This is why, excuse me, if you've got rentals in West Virginia, you must know your local housing laws. So because West Virginia does not have rent control, landlords can raise the rent by any amount as often as they choose, but they cannot increase the rent during the lease term unless the lease agreement allows for it. Additionally, landlords cannot increase the rent out of discrimination of federally protected classes, which is fair housing. That makes sense. State law does not specific how much notice landlords must give before raising the rent. Landlords and tenants can agree on minimum notice period for rent increase in the lease agreement. So make sure you're putting that in if you're a landlord in West Virginia. Housing discrimination in West Virginia. I'm not going to read this. This is fair housing stuff. And it looks like this is just federal. It doesn't look like West Virginia. Oh, West Virginia has its Human Rights Commission. And so there is discrimination for the state as well. Additional landlord-tenant regulations in West Virginia. Landlord right to entry. You've got to give reasonable advance notice, often 24 hours. Yeah, and then you don't have to give permission when you're dealing with an emergency. That makes sense. Rent collection and related fees. There's no grace period. Landlords are not required to provide a grace period for the payment of rent before charging a late fee. Maximum late fee, no limit, but it must be reasonable. A rent receipt is not required, and there is no state law governing which payment methods landlords may or may not accept for the payment of rent. Small claims court in West Virginia. This is most of the time about security deposits. Mandatory disclosures in West Virginia. Lead-based paint, but that's a federal disclosure. You've got to do that. Changing the locks. West Virginia does not regulate the tenant changing the locks. So unless it's allowed, unless the terms of the rental agreement say otherwise, landlords can't unilaterally change locks on their tenants, as this is considered a form of illegal self-help eviction. So the tenant can change the locks. That's kind of interesting. Okay. So here's another informational item. It says many cities in West Virginia have their own landlord-tenant laws in addition to state requirements. Check your local and municipality, local county and municipality for additional regulations. See this resources below for more general information. They've got at Charleston, 5 steps to housing complaints, and then they've got a bunch of frequently asked questions. So that's a little more concise. I like this one, and there are others that I like as well. Let's go into abandoned items. Actually, we already did this one, but I put this hyperlink specifically from Legal Aid into the show notes so you can go in here. But you can see there's quite a bit in here, but there's a lot that West Virginia just straight up doesn't regulate. Okay, let's go to the bingo card. Tenant application fee. Yes, you can charge a reasonable tenant application fee, it looks like. Grace period for late rent without penalty. Doesn't look like. Looks like there is a, I'm going to go back to this one. It looks like you can charge a late fee. Yep. But it doesn't say how much, and I bet it's not regulated, and it's probably not dictated at all. Security deposit. It looks like the security deposit can be any amount. I've got it here on the screen. Maximum is none. Looks like most is 1 month's rent. And they do not have to pay interest. They do not have to put it in a separate account. There's nothing special about anything about the security deposit. Now, it's best practices to put their security deposit in a separate non-operating account, because remember, that's not your money, that's the tenant's money. Lease wording and details. There is nothing about lease wording, and I don't see any standard forms or anything. Is an emergency contact required in the event of a tenant abandonment, incapacitation, death, or imprisonment? No, there's not. But again, another best practice, especially as everybody ages. Pets and animals, pet deposit, pet rent. Remember, a pet is an animal that does not have a job. A service animal is an animal that has a job. And so if you've got a no pet policy, or you're going to be paying pet rent, or there's a pet fee, that is all because of pets. You cannot do that for a service animal. Delivery of signed release required. Nothing mentioned. Condition inspection at move-in. No, it doesn't, it's not required. However, if you are going to start deducting things at the end, it's best practice to do a condition inspection at move-in and at the end. And that way, if you give if you have a deduction due to beyond normal wear and tear, then you have grounds for that. Where are we? Required maintenance inspections. No. How often can the rent be increased? Anytime, as much as you want. And the rent notice, the proper notice on a rent increase is whatever you feel like. How much can the rent increase? Whatever you want. Like, wow, West Virginia is quite loosey-goosey on this. Renter's insurance is not required. It is mentioned, but it's not required. Is abusive access defined? Yes. Is landlord retaliation defined? Yes. Is there any timing on landlord retaliation? No. It just says if this happens, you can't retaliate. If you have a fixed lease, does it end abruptly? Yes. Condition inspection required at move out? No, but you should. Return of deposit or timing. This is very strange. The time limit for the return. The landlords must return the security deposit within 45 days after the next tenant moves in, or 60 days after the lease term ends, whichever is sooner. I've never seen that before. That's interesting. Use of deposit as the last month's rent, yes or no? You can, along with all the other fees, including late fees. And then abandoned items. We talked about abandoned items already. I'm going to go ahead and I'm showing this on the screen about abandoned items. Did we go through abandoned items? Maybe we didn't. Okay, so when the rent is late and then there appears to be nobody at the unit, then it looks like there is unpaid abandoned lease. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read through this because this is a little bit, oh boy, this is quite long. Okay, if any tenant from whom rent is in arrears and unpaid abandon the lease property, then the landlord and his or her agent shall post a notice in writing at a conspicuous part of the property, probably on the front door, requiring the tenant to pay the rent within 1 month. If the rent is not paid within that time, the landlord should be entitled to the possession of the property and may enter thereon, and the right of the tenant to the lease property shall end. The landlord may recover the rent owed up until that time. And that's called possession. So the landlord will take back possession. If any tenant in a housing development, nope, I'm not going to talk about the housing authority. So you're trying to get the tenant's note attention. Say, look, you're going to post this notice in a conspicuous place on the property, and you've got to send by first class mail with a certificate of mailing, which provides a receipt of date that says, please forward to an address and mailed to the tenant at either the lease property, a PO box held by the tenant, or the most recent forwarding address if known. And then the written notice under this section that the lease property is considered abandoned. So there is a bit of wording here for the abandoned. Lease property is considered abandoned. Any personal property left by the tenant must be removed for the sake of safekeeping, and the landlord or housing authority has stored the property by a date specified in the written notice is that not less than 30 days from when the written notice was mailed, or not less than 60 days after the written notice was mailed if the tenant has been notified, or if they're on active duty in the armed forces. So if it was abandoned and they just left. If this occurs to you, you probably should call legal aid. Like this can get kind of hairy here, and this seems like it's a little bit up to interpretation, and it may not be. You don't want it to be. Make sure you're educating yourself on this one. Okay, so it's either 30 or 60 days. If the personal property is not removed within the time for this property, then the tenant forfeits his or her ownership to the personal property. There you go. Okay. So that's your abandoned items. I didn't realize we didn't catch that. So, but let's wrap this up. Each of my location-specific podcasts is set up the same way. I'm going to stop sharing here. I answer the same 4 questions. What are the basics of the Landlord Housing Act for that location, in this case, West Virginia? What are the nuances of that place? and some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant and where to get help in your local area. Then I reviewed my bingo card of the standard items I see most often when I do these location-specific items. Episodes. And if you're interested in another geographic area that I've done, there's a ton in the library and there's going to be more as time goes on. You already know what I'm going to talk about. You already have the framework. It'll just be a different location. This episode, again, is not all inclusive. You must do your own research for not only West Virginia, but your county, your municipality. They are famous in West Virginia for having little boroughs and little rules that apply. And 5 minutes after this airs, it could change also. So make sure you're starting here and then you do your own research. If you're listening to this podcast, though, chances are you're either new to real estate or you might be new to real estate in West Virginia. Things you can do to help yourself are, first of all, educate yourself, read this code, go through all of this, find every educational resource you can about landlording, and find other landlords from West Virginia or from your local area as well. You can do this on social media or you can do it in person at a meetup. This is really good. Get in the conversation with other landlords that are asking the same question that you are. I hope you enjoyed today's show all about West Virginia. A kind reminder, if you haven't already, please subscribe and follow the show, My Life as a Landlord. Much appreciated in advance. Today, I'm recording this episode in Desolation Sound on my boat in Laura Cove, north of Vancouver, British Columbia. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 170 about the state of North Dakota. I'll see you there.